Peace, love, liberty, radio.
And the walls come crashing down as the war at home reaches your town. You have no choice, it's safe and clean. We all submit to the war machine.
So today is Wednesday. It is the Wednesday after the New Hampshire presidential primary, and those results are still trickling in. Yes, I know the winners have been announced, and it's been announced that Donald Trump has won the Republican presidential primary. And I'm going to go over this just briefly, probably a little more in depth than what I'm intending, because that's how it works. But, today, Wednesday, is the Ask Me Anything episode. And I did not get any questions submitted per se, other than the questions that I submitted to myself that I mentioned on, I think, Monday. I had mentioned a couple of the questions that on this podcast that I started listening to called The School of Greatness. There are a couple of questions that the host always asks his guest, and there's like a recurring 3 questions that he asks, and I definitely want to answer those because they're really good questions, and hopefully you will wind up answering the questions for yourself, and maybe it'll do a little bit of self-reflection, because I really, on the one question, I really had to do some self-reflection on it. And the other ones I kind of have an answer to, but not really, and it might change from day to day. And I've put it in my task manager to answer these questions every day, and I'll go over that. But let me touch briefly on the election that happened yesterday, because I do live in New Hampshire, and there's a saying that New Hampshireites treat politics the way people in Alabama and Texas treat football, to where politics is basically a sport here. The city that I live in, Keene, New Hampshire, we have an election roughly every 6 to 8 months. And that seems like a lot of elections, right? And yes, it is. We actually have, we had the primary, the presidential preference primary yesterday, and there's another election in 4 weeks. There is a town election on March 8th, where it's technically not a town election in Keene, but statewide it's called town elections. And in Keene, it's the school board election. So we'll go to the polls, and the first question on the ballot is, do you want to raise the school budget by X percent, or do you want to raise it by Y percent? And both, they're both increases. And they don't actually ask the, percent. They say, do you want to pass a budget that is this? If you vote no, then the budget will be this. And that second number is higher. So, how big do you want to raise the budget is basically the question that is being asked. So, anyway, we had the election yesterday. We have another one in a month. And then in September, there's the regular primary for state offices, state rep, governor, U.S. Senate. And then in November, there's the general election. And then next spring, we again have the school, in Keene at least, we have the school district election. And then in the fall of the odd number years, we have the municipal election. So roughly every 6 to 8 months, there's an election where I live. So yes, politics in a lot of ways is very much a sport in New Hampshire. But that said, Donald Trump declared the winner, and there's still about 7 of the precincts that have not yet reported. And I'm really looking forward to these final results being tabulated, not because I care if Donald Trump breaks 100,000 votes, not because I care if John Kasich winds up with 17% or 16%, not because I care that Ted Cruz is going to wind up 0.5% above Jeb Bush. What I care about, and what I'm interested in seeing, is the actual tally of write-in votes. And I am interested in that for several reasons. One, because it's always interesting to see who winds up getting write-in votes. And also, it's going to be interesting to see if I wind up getting more write-in votes than some of the people that were actually on the ballot. And that's not an easy thing to do generally. However, there were 30 people on the Republican presidential primary ballot, and looking at the results here from WMUR, which is basically the television station in New Hampshire. Yes, I know there's another one. There's WBIN that runs New Hampshire 1. But most people, when they hear WMUR, they know WMUR is the television station in New Hampshire. When they hear WBIN, they ask, where's that? Is that one of those Boston things that, you might be able to pick up the signal? No. It's headquartered in New Hampshire. But anyway, WMUR, they're reporting that 293 of the 300 precincts are reporting. And I'm just going to read off the names of 5 individuals that were on the Republican Party primary ballot that all received fewer than 10 votes, with 293 of 300 precincts reporting. So we have Walter Iwachi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's spelled Iwachiw. There's Kevin Huey. There's Matt Drozd, Robert Mann, and Peter Messina. They received 9, 7, 5, 5, and 5 votes, respectively. On the Democratic side, Raymond Burrows and Richard Will both received 7 votes in the Democratic primary. Again, this is with 293 of the 300 precincts reporting. And one thing that I definitely wanted to mention on this Republican thing, especially with the results, to where they're saying Donald Trump won. And this is, yes, he did wind up receiving more votes than any other candidate, but he only has 35% of the vote. And yes, I realize that that's more than John Kasich and Ted Cruz combined, and you would have to wind up throwing in Jeb Bush as far as, the next candidate down to wind up surpassing the vote total that Donald Trump has. But again, there were 30 candidates on the ballot, and Donald Trump is, he's still at a plurality. Barely over 1/3 of the people that voted for Donald Trump in the Republican primary. And if you look back at the Iowa caucuses, it was the same, to where the winner wound up with just over 1/3 of the vote. And it's really hard to say that that person is, quote-unquote, the winner. Yes, they received more votes, but you can't, or rather you should not, use this plurality system to wind up imposing selections on everyone. And, luckily there's still more of this process to wind up going through. But at this point, it does look like Donald Trump might wind up being the Republican nominee, and that is kind of scary, right? Now, I do want to sort of shift gears here, talk a little bit about some of the other processes involved in selecting presidential candidates, because I was interviewed about just that, and the article came out a couple days ago. I did not see it until today, but I'll post that link in the show notes, and I'll tell you about it when we come back on Peace, Love, and Liberty Radio.
In 2115 New England, there are no borders, no states, and no regulations, yet never has a more peaceful and prosperous place existed. But Mr. Drake's security company has seen better days. Faced with the prospect of waning power, Mr. Drake intends to replace the anarchy of New England with a government. But at what cost? And can anyone stop him? Anarchy in New England by Joe Jarvis is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. In 1999, Darryl W. Perry began a search for traditional values, which led him down a path to the ideas of liberty. He tells the story in A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty. Of the book, Dr. Brian Sovereign says, sometimes it's funny, and sometimes I think it's crazy, but it's always authentic. Find A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty by Darryl W. Perry on Facebook, read reviews on Amazon, ask for A Rebel's Journey wherever books are sold, or visit arebelsjourney.com. When her plush and comfy life suddenly and unexpectedly fell apart, Brooke and her dog Cloud set out to defy the odds. If this is a man's world, as they say, living on the streets is no place for a young woman. One day she awoke in the redwood forest and realized she had become a hobo, and would ultimately come to know exactly what it means to survive. How to Be a Hobo by Brooke Willett is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
So before I get into that article by Al Jazeera America, yes, I was interviewed by Al Jazeera America, and no, I don't think that it makes me a terrorist for speaking to, Arab media. Actually, the guy that interviewed me, I don't think was Arab. His name is Joshua Eaton. That does not sound like an Arab name to me, but I digress, and I will jump into that article here briefly in just a moment. But before I do, I want to make sure that I tell you about the Lava Flow podcast. What's that? You're not listening to the Lava Flow podcast yet, but you know that the government is screwed up and tries to run everything in your life. What is wrong with you? Go right now. Pause this podcast if you have to, or put it in your task manager, put it in your organizer, if you will, and go to thelavaflow.com/listen. The Lava Flow Podcast, channeling the flow of information to the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and agorist community. Subscribe today using any podcatcher at thelavaflow.com/listen. Or just go back to sucking up to the government. The Lava Flow Podcast, striking the root every episode. So I realize that, yes, today is the Ask Me Anything episode. And I realize that, yes, I have not yet answered a question other than, my own sort of questions to myself that I want to answer. And that's because I did not get any questions submitted, and part of that is my fault because I forgot to put up the solicitation for questions on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else until sometime yesterday. And that's because, again, I'm in New Hampshire, and this is, basically football season. It's politics season. The primary was yesterday. I was interviewed by Al Jazeera America last week. That article came out on Sunday. I didn't see it until today. It would have been nice for me to have actually been able to share this before the primary. But nonetheless, I will post the link to this in the show notes. But the reason that I am mentioning about, the politics season, on Monday I spent a lot of time not just, with my regular duties that I do of various podcasts and various media production, but I was also trying to head up some people to go out and collect petitions, and I had people calling me saying, yeah, I'll come by, and then they never showed up, and so while I'm waiting on them, I wasn't able to go do other things, and then, got sidetracked and whatnot. And so that's basically my excuse for why I didn't get the Ask Me Anything thread up. However, Monday evening, I wound up recording an episode of the Anarcho-Yapitalist podcast, and that will come out sometime soon. Whenever it does, I will let you know, and I will post a link in the show notes. And then after that, I wound up recording a presidential debate from... I was actually here in Keene, and I Skyped in to the Fairfax, the Fairfax Public Access Television Station in Fairfax, Virginia, where an outlet called publicsquare.net, Public Square Television, they were doing a presidential debate series to where they've been recording a few of these, and I debated a member of the Green Party. And, as life would have it, this candidate, pseudonym, and I apologies, pseudonym, if you're listening, I'm totally going to butcher your last name. Pseudonym Moyasafa Curry was actually coming to New Hampshire the day after we recorded this debate. So on Monday, we recorded the debate, and she said, I'm actually going to be in New Hampshire tomorrow. And I said, oh, wow, that's amazing. We might have to try and meet up because, it would be nice to meet you. And so as luck would have it, I did have to wind up going to Manchester last night, and that's where she was staying. And so when I met up with a group of my friends that I was going to meet up with, I had messaged her and said, hey, I'm meeting people at this restaurant. Feel free to come over. And so she actually wound up meeting up with my friends before I got there because she just struck up a conversation with one of them. And so I showed up, and my friend said, look who I found. She actually was here looking for you. And I was like, yeah, I told her I was going to be here. And so then, the story of how they wound up chatting, it was just odd to where, somebody asked something about, should I wear my boots? And then somehow it turned on to conversation about presidential candidates. And my friend said, oh, yeah, one of my friends is actually running. And she said, yeah, I'm actually meeting somebody here. Is it Darryl? And they both, yeah, it is Darryl. And so, long story short here, had a very pleasant chat. Actually, chat is not the right word. Shared a meal with and enjoyed the company for several hours of Green Party presidential candidate pseudonym Mayasifa Curry and several of my friends. And one thing that was mentioned was someone, and I don't know who, because Miss Mayasifa Curry said that she would not relay the name, but someone told her that I was a hothead. And so she was scared when she went to this debate. She was scared that I might yell and scream at her. And she said, you're one of the nicest people I've ever met. And so that's a great compliment. And I do find it kind of funny that, someone labeled me a hothead, and maybe they've only ever seen me on Black Sheep Rising, the television show that no longer exists, to where, yes, I would, get fired up and angry a little bit, but I was also imbibing on some alcoholic beverage during that show. But I just think it's funny that someone would label me a hothead, and someone would be scared of me without ever actually meeting me. And that brings me to the question and answer part of the show that should have begun at the very beginning. And the reason that I wanted to mention all of that was because during the conversation, it was, it came up that Pseudonym is going to be at some point opening up a winery in Ghana. And she said it's going to be about 3 years until the wines are ready. But somehow, I forget what the book was, but she was, explaining the story of how she came to open a winery and what was sort of her motivating factor to that. And she read a book, and she was asked 2 questions. And these 2 questions are wonderful. I said, please repeat that. I want to take a note. And so the questions are, what do you want to accomplish before you die? What has prevented you from doing it today? And I love the depth of these questions, because this is something that it could change day to day. Although, and I definitely want to tie this in with the other questions that are asked on the School of Greatness, and that is, what are you grateful for? What is your definition of greatness? And if today was your last day and everything you had ever created was wiped away, but your friends and family gave you a sheet of paper and said, write down 3 truths, what would you write down? These things are all interconnected as far as the way I see it. And I'll answer these questions in just a moment.
The Doublespeak Dictionary by Leslie Starr O'Hara satirizes the marked difference between the ideal of we the people and the reality of we the elite, while offering an insightful glimpse into the clockworks of the totalitarian mind. Ever irreverent but never irrelevant, the Doublespeak Dictionary serves as a subversive and humorous but timely reminder that the emperor has no clothes. The Doublespeak Dictionary is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless, free market, non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you are helping the state. Stop doing it. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin at weusecoins.com. That's weusecoins.com.
It is the year 91,001 BCE. Witness humanity's origins in Hyperchronius, a classic role-playing game for Windows PCs with a story like no other game before. A liberty-oriented experience that is not to be missed. Go to zog.ninja to get your copy of Hyperchronius today. Use the code FPP to get $1 off. Hyperchronius, zog.ninja, code FPP.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com.
So, before I get into the philosophical portion of or metaphysical portion, if you will, of the podcast, I want to make sure that I tell you about Roberts and Roberts Brokerage. That's because for nearly 40 years, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling precious metals like gold and silver. They take Bitcoin for precious metal purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid in the digital currency. Call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage today for knowledgeable advice on buying and selling precious metals and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 800-874-9760 or online at rrbi.co. That's 800-874-9760 or online at rrbi.co. Now, before I get into answering these questions, just do want to remind you that I am fairly certain that I will not be doing a show on Friday. I'm going up to the New Hampshire State House Friday morning testifying on some legislation, and depending on how long I wind up staying up there, I may or may not get back to Keene in time to actually record at the hour that I like to record. So just there's that warning, and then next week there definitely will not be an episode of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on Friday or the week after that. And looking at the calendar, it looks as though there might not be a Friday episode of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio until March 11th. I will keep you posted if that changes. So now back to these questions. And again, as far as I see it, from sort of an emotional, philosophical, metaphysical sort of standpoint, all 5 of these questions are very interrelated and interconnected. Let me go over these questions again, and I'm really only going to answer 3 of them. The first 2 I will not be answering on the air, not because, they're any sort of thing that I don't want to share. It's just, sometimes goals are personal. And, I really, honestly, I'm working towards achieving everything that I do want to achieve before I die. Although there are some things like, swim with the sharks and travel to every country in the world. Now, what's preventing me from doing either of those things? Money, basically. That's what's preventing me from traveling to every country in the world, is money. That's what's preventing me from swimming with sharks, because it's not easy. Yes, I could just, next time I'm down near an ocean, go swim and wait until I see a fin and be like, okay, I swam with the sharks. But that's not what I'm talking about when I say I want to swim with the sharks. Like, I want to go to the Bahamas where there's these Caribbean reef sharks and like a big giant pack or school or whatever the heck you wind up calling a group of sharks, and I just want to swim around with them. Why Caribbean reef sharks? Well, because they're not big enough to eat me. When I say swim with sharks, I'm not saying like I want to go swim right up next to a great white or a tiger shark or one of those things that could just, like swallow me whole with one gulp. No, I'm saying, like the smaller ones that are like 3 feet long. So, the fun sharks, if you will. And again, travel the world. I would love to travel the world and just be a permanent traveler. And the thing that prevents me from doing that is money. So I guess I will go ahead and answer those. But again, there are other things that I would like to accomplish before I die. But again, those are sort of personal sorts of things, but kind of interconnected with the next 3 questions that I will wind up answering. And yes, I probably will, delve into some personal things that I don't really intend to at this point. But, that's the way the show works, right? Like, I just get on a train of thought and I just keep talking. And then the next thing you know, I'm telling you about how I almost got hit by a train when I was 5 years old. So, what are you grateful for? And this is something, again, I've put this in my Wonder List, which is the task organizer. And it's under something titled Answer These Questions Every Day. And it's something that really sort of a meditation sort of exercise. And I realize it's not meditation per se, but it is something that sort of gets you in that right frame of mind. So what are you grateful for? And I would say today I am grateful for my health, which I've not always had. I've never been, like on the verge of dying as an adult, but I've definitely for many years not been healthy. It was not quite 12 months ago that I weighed 317 pounds. And today I weigh 173. And yes, I still have some knee pain. I've still got, problems with my back. And I've still got problems with my nose to where I broke my nose when I was 12, and then I re-broke it swimming into the side of a pool when I was 18. So I've got nasal problems, and I've still got joint pain in my knee. It's definitely not as bad as it was, and I've got I don't know what it is, some sort of nerve sort of thing to where every now and then part of the left leg, it doesn't really fall asleep, but it starts to fall asleep, and it feels kind of strange. So, there are definitely health problems that I have, but I'm a lot healthier than I was just a year ago. And over the summer, how many people can say that they've done a triathlon? And yes, I realize it was a mini triathlon. I only swam a quarter of a mile, and I only biked for 8, and I only ran/walked 5K. But I did it. And that was when I signed up. It was, okay, I'm going to do this. And I think I talked about, a lot of the mental stuff that was going on during the triathlon to where it was a lot more of a lonely experience than I expected. And I would dare say that the triathlon was a lot more mentally exhausting than physical. I could do the physical again. I could ride a bike for 30 miles and run/walk 10 afterwards. The swimming was a lot more physically demanding than I thought it would be going into it, but it was mentally taxing because I was all alone. Every sport that I've ever done before, it's always been team sports. And when I work, I generally prefer working, either by myself or in a small group. That way I'm not, too dependent on other people, but there's always someone nearby. When I was doing the triathlon, with the exception of the swim, where there were people around, basically to make sure that nobody drowned, when I was biking and running, it was just me. There was no one to share a thought with at all. And so it was a lot more mentally taxing than I expected. And I suspect that if I do a triathlon in the future, and I know that right after it was over, I told the organizer, I said, Robin, if I ever say something so stupid as, I'm going to do a triathlon, please slap me. And she said, oh, you're going to do one again. And I'm actually thinking about doing the one again this summer. but I'm definitely going to practice the swimming even more. And I realize that I've not answered the other questions. I will answer them next week, I promise. But if I wind up finishing the swim and I'm able to run and bike with other people, it's not going to be as mentally strenuous. But that goes back to answer the question, what am I grateful for? I'm grateful for my health because I've not always had it. Hey, don't forget, I'll be back next Monday at FPPRadio.com.